Maya Chin stared at the marriage contract spread across the mahogany table, her hands trembling slightly as she read the terms for the third time. The black ink seemed to mock her, each clause a reminder of how her life had spiraled beyond her control in just 2 weeks. "This is completely absurd," she whispered, looking up at her father who sat across from her with his head buried in his hands. David Chun, once a proud businessman, now looked like a broken man. His company, Chin Industries, was drowning in debt, and the loan sharks were circling like vultures. "Maya, please," her father's voice cracked. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but we have no choice. Alexander Blackwood has agreed to pay off all our debts and save the company. All he asks in return is this." Maya's eyes drifted to the photograph attached to the contract. Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, stared back at her with cold, dark eyes. At 46, he was 21 years older than her. His sharp jawline and silver-streaked hair gave him a distinguished look, but there was something unsettling about his gaze, as if he could see straight through to her soul. "He's old enough to be my father," Maya protested, her voice rising. "And I've never even met him. Why would someone like him want to marry someone like me?" Her father finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "He said he needs a wife for business purposes. Something about his board of directors pressuring him to settle down. He specifically requested you after seeing your photo at the charity gala last month." Maya remembered that gala. She had only attended because her father insisted, wearing a simple blue dress that had belonged to her mother. She had felt completely out of place among all the wealthy socialites and businessmen. The idea that someone had been watching her, studying her, made her skin crawl. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "What about selling the house? Or the cars? Everything is already mortgaged, sweetheart. We're millions in debt. The creditors are threatening to take everything, including our home. Your mother's medical bills from her cancer treatment wiped out our savings. And then, the recession hit the business hard." Her father's voice broke completely. "I failed her, and now I'm failing you." Maya felt tears stinging her eyes as she thought about her mother, who had died 2 years ago. Elizabeth Chun had been the heart of their family, always encouraging Maya to follow her dreams of becoming an artist. She would have hated this arrangement. "What kind of man buys a wife?" Maya asked bitterly. "A very powerful and dangerous one," her father admitted quietly. "Alexander Blackwood isn't someone you refuse. His business empire spans across 3 continents. He has connections everywhere, including with some very unsavory people. If we reject this offer—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Maya understood. They would lose everything anyway, and they might face even worse consequences. The front door suddenly burst open, and Maya's younger brother James rushed in, his school uniform disheveled, and his face flushed with panic. "Dad, there are men outside," he gasped. "Big men in black suits. They're asking questions about you at Mrs. Patterson's house next door." David Chin's face went white. "They're here already. Maya, you have to sign. Now." "Who are they?" Maya demanded, but she already knew the answer from the terror in her father's eyes. "People we owe money to. Very dangerous people." He grabbed a pen and thrust it toward her. "Please, Maya, sign it. Save us all." Maya looked at her 17-year-old brother, who was staring at her with confused, frightened eyes. James was supposed to start college next year. He was brilliant, with dreams of becoming a doctor. If she didn't sign this contract, those dreams would die along with everything else. Her hands shook as she took the pen. "What happens after I sign?" "Mr. Blackwood's car will arrive in 1 hour to take you to his estate. The wedding is tomorrow morning. It will be a small, private ceremony." "Tomorrow." Maya's voice came out as a squeak. "But I haven't. I need time to prepare, to think." "There is no time," her father said urgently. The sound of car doors slamming outside made them all freeze. "They're here. Please, Maya, do this for our family." Maya closed her eyes and thought about her mother's gentle voice, telling her to be strong no matter what life threw at her. When she opened them again, her resolve had hardened. She scrawled her signature across the bottom of the contract, sealing her fate. The relief on her father's face was immediate, but it was tinged with guilt and sorrow. "I'm so sorry, my dear girl. I promise I'll find a way to make this right." Maya stood up from the table, her legs feeling unsteady. I need to pack. She climbed the stairs to her childhood bedroom, each step feeling like she was walking to her execution. Her room was filled with her artwork, paintings of landscapes, portraits of her family, abstract pieces that reflected her emotions. She touched one of her latest paintings, a sunset over a field of wildflowers that she had been working on for months. How could she explain to Alexander Blackwood that she was an artist? Would he even care? From what she had heard about him, he was all business, all the time. The rumors painted him as a cold, calculating man who had built his empire through ruthless tactics and questionable connections. She pulled out a small suitcase and began packing her essentials. Her art supplies, a few changes of clothes, photographs of her family, and her mother's jewelry box. Everything else would have to stay behind. As she packed, Maya tried to imagine what her new life would be like. Would she live in some massive, cold mansion? Would Alexander expect her to be the perfect corporate wife, attending galas and dinner parties? The thought made her stomach churn. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. James peeked in, his eyes still wide with confusion and fear. Maya, what's happening? Dad won't explain anything properly. She sat down on her bed and patted the space beside her. James sat down, and she noticed how much he had grown in the past year. He was almost as tall as her now, but he still had that innocent, boyish face that reminded her so much of their mother. I'm getting married, James, she said gently. To who? You don't have a boyfriend. To someone who can help our family out of a very bad situation. James frowned. You mean like an arranged marriage? Like in those old movies Mom used to watch? Something like that. Maya wrapped her arm around his shoulders. I need you to be strong and take care of Dad while I'm gone. Can you do that for me? Will I still see you? Of course, she lied, having no idea what Alexander Blackwood would allow. And you're still going to college next year. This marriage is going to make sure of that. James hugged her tightly, and Maya felt tears threatening again. She had practically raised him since their mother died, and leaving him felt like tearing out a piece of her heart. Exactly 1 hour later, a sleek black limousine pulled up outside their modest suburban home. Maya watched from her bedroom window as a uniformed driver got out and approached their front door. Her father answered before the man could knock. Miss Chen, the driver asked politely. Mr. Blackwood has sent me to escort you. Maya grabbed her suitcase and took one last look around her room. Tomorrow, she would be Mrs. Alexander Blackwood. The thought still felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. She walked downstairs to find her father and brother waiting by the door. Her father looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. Be careful, sweetheart, he whispered as he hugged her goodbye. And remember, no matter what happens, your mother and I are proud of you. James clung to her for a long moment, and she whispered promises in his ear about staying in touch and making sure he got everything he needed for school. The driver took her suitcase and opened the limousine door for her. The interior was luxurious beyond anything Maya had ever experienced, with leather seats, a minibar, and a television screen. As the car pulled away from her childhood home, Maya pressed her face to the window, watching her family grow smaller until they disappeared entirely. The drive to Alexander Blackwood's estate took nearly 2 hours, winding through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until they were driving through countryside that Maya had never seen before. The properties here were massive, hidden behind tall gates and manicured hedges. When they finally turned through a pair of imposing iron gates with a large B emblazoned in the center, Maya's breath caught in her throat. The driveway seemed to go on forever, lined with ancient oak trees that created a canopy overhead. In the distance, she could see the outline of a mansion that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. As they got closer, Maya could make out more details. The house was enormous, built from dark stone with tall windows and multiple wings stretching in different directions. There were towers and balconies, and ivy climbing up parts of the walls. It was beautiful in a dark, imposing way, but it didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress. The limousine pulled up to the main entrance, where wide stone steps led up to massive wooden doors. Maya's palms were sweating as the driver opened her door and helped her out. The evening air was cool and carried the scent of roses and jasmine from the gardens. Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you in the library, the driver informed her as he retrieved her suitcase. Mrs. Whitmore will show you the way. As if summoned by his words, the front doors opened to reveal an elderly woman in a crisp gray dress. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind but cautious eyes. "Miss Chun," she said with a slight British accent. "I'm Mrs. Whitmore, the house manager. Please, come in." Maya followed her through the entrance hall, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The interior of the house was just as imposing as the exterior, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and oil paintings of stern-looking people in ornate frames. Everything screamed old money and power. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you," Mrs. Whitmore said as they walked down a long corridor lined with more paintings. "He's been in the library since this afternoon, preparing for tomorrow's ceremony." "What's he like?" Maya asked quietly, needing to know what she was walking into. Mrs. Whitmore paused for a moment, as if considering how to answer. "He's a very private man, Miss Chun, very focused on his work. He doesn't have many visitors, and he keeps to himself mostly." It wasn't exactly reassuring, but Maya appreciated the honesty. They stopped in front of a set of double doors made from the same dark wood as the paneling. "Here we are," Mrs. Whitmore said, knocking gently. "Sir, Miss Chin has arrived." "Come in," came a deep voice from within. Mrs. Whitmore opened the doors and gestured for Maya to enter. The library was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covering every wall. A fire crackled in a massive fireplace, and the warm light danced across leather-bound books and antique furniture. Alexander Blackwood stood with his back to her, looking out a tall window that overlooked the gardens. He was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored dark suit. His black hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and, even from behind, he radiated an aura of controlled power. "You may go, Mrs. Whitmore," he said without turning around. "Please have Miss Chin's belongings taken to the blue guest room." Maya heard the doors close behind her, and, suddenly, she was alone with the man who would be her husband in less than 12 hours. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Finally, Alexander turned to face her, and Maya got her first real look at the man who had bought her like a piece of property. His face was exactly as it had appeared in the photograph, sharp, angular features with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were a deep gray, almost black in the firelight, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. "You're younger than I expected," he said, his voice low and measured. "I'm 25, Maya replied, lifting her chin slightly. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her, no matter how powerful he was. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Please, sit down." He gestured to a leather armchair near the fireplace, and Maya sat down carefully, her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap. Alexander took the chair opposite her, studying her like she was a business proposition he was considering. "I assume your father explained the terms of our arrangement," he said. "He explained that you're paying his debts in exchange for a wife," Maya replied bluntly. "What I don't understand is why you need to buy one." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly at her directness. "Most women in your position would be more diplomatic." "I'm not most women." "No," he said slowly. "I can see that." He leaned back in his chair, still watching her carefully. "To answer your question, I need a wife for business reasons. My board of directors has been pressuring me to settle down, to present a more stable, family-oriented image. It's affecting some of our international deals. So you decided to buy a wife instead of actually finding someone to love?" "Love is a luxury I can't afford," Alexander said coldly. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You'll have your own room, your own space. All I require is your presence at certain social functions, and your cooperation in maintaining the illusion that we're a happily married couple." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "That's it? You don't expect other things? If you're asking about physical intimacy, that won't be necessary unless you specifically desire it." His tone was so matter-of-fact that Maya felt heat creeping up her neck. "This marriage is purely for show. What about children? Won't people expect us to have children?" "I have no interest in children," Alexander said firmly. "And I assume you feel the same way, given your circumstances." Maya thought about her brother James, and how much she had always wanted children of her own someday. But she pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about what she wanted anymore. What if I want to continue my art? She asked. Your art? Alexander looked genuinely surprised. I'm a painter. I was supposed to have my first gallery showing next month. The words came out more bitter than she had intended. I see. Well, I suppose you can continue that as a hobby, as long as it doesn't interfere with your duties as my wife. A hobby. Maya's life's passion, the thing that connected her to her mother's memory, reduced to a hobby. She clenched her hands into fists in her lap. Are there any other questions? Alexander asked, apparently ready to end their conversation. Just one, Maya said, standing up. What happens if I change my mind? If I decide I can't go through with this? Alexander's expression turned glacial. Your father's debts would become due immediately, with interest. And I'm afraid the people he borrowed from aren't known for their patience or mercy. The threat was clear, even if it was delivered in a calm, civilized tone. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. I see, she said quietly. I'll have Mrs. Whitmore show you to your room, Alexander said, rising from his chair. The ceremony is at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in the garden. There will be a few witnesses, Mrs. Whitmore, my lawyer, and the minister. After that, we'll have a small reception, and then life will continue as normal. As normal. As if anything about this situation could ever be considered normal. Good night, Maya, Alexander said, already turning back to the window. I'll see you at the altar. Maya walked to the door on unsteady legs, feeling like she was in some kind of bizarre dream. As she reached for the handle, Alexander's voice stopped her. Maya. She turned back to look at him, hope fluttering in her chest that maybe he was going to say something kind, something human. The blue guest room will be your permanent room after tomorrow. I trust you'll find it comfortable. The hope died as quickly as it had been born. Maya left the library without another word, finding Mrs. Whitmore waiting for her in the hallway. This way, dear, the older woman said gently, leading her up a grand staircase to the second floor. The blue guest room was larger than Maya's entire bedroom at home had been. It had a four-poster bed with blue silk curtains, a sitting area with a fireplace, and French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. Her small suitcase looked pathetic sitting on the enormous bed. If you need anything, just ring the bell by your bed, Mrs. Whitmore said. Dinner was served hours ago, but I can have cook prepare something light if you're hungry. I'm not hungry, Maya lied, though she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Her stomach was too tied up in knots to handle food. Very well. The ceremony tomorrow is quite informal, so you needn't worry about finding something elaborate to wear. Mr. Blackwood has arranged for someone to do your hair and makeup in the morning if you'd like. Maya nodded numbly, and Mrs. Whitmore left her alone. Maya woke up to gentle sunlight streaming through the French doors of her room. For a moment, she forgot where she was and why she was there. Then, reality crashed back down on her like a cold wave. Today was her wedding day. She sat up in the enormous bed, her heart already racing with anxiety. The clock on the nightstand showed 8:30 in the morning. In just over an hour, she would be married to a man she barely knew. A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Come in, she called, pulling the silk robe she had found in the closet around herself. Mrs. Whitmore entered carrying a breakfast tray, followed by a young woman with an elaborate case of makeup supplies. Good morning, dear, Mrs. Whitmore said cheerfully, though Maya could see concern in her eyes. I thought you might like some breakfast before we get you ready. This is Sarah. She'll be helping with your hair and makeup. Hello, Sarah said with a bright smile. She was probably around Maya's age, with blonde hair and friendly blue eyes. Don't worry, I'll keep everything natural and elegant. Mr. Blackwood specifically requested nothing too dramatic. Of course he did. Even on her wedding day, Alexander Blackwood was controlling every detail. Maya forced a smile and nodded her thanks. The breakfast was more elaborate than anything Maya usually ate: fresh fruit, croissants, eggs Benedict, and coffee that smelled heavenly. Her stomach was too nervous to appreciate it, but she forced herself to eat something, knowing she would need the energy to get through the day. While she ate, Sarah set up her supplies and chattered about the beautiful weather and how lovely the gardens looked for an outdoor ceremony. Her cheerfulness was grating against Maya's mood, but She tried to be polite. Have you worked for Mr. Blackwood long? Maya asked as Sarah began working on her hair. Oh, I don't work for him directly, Sarah replied, running her fingers through Maya's long, dark hair. I own a salon in town. Mrs. Whitmore called me last night and asked if I could come out here this morning. I was surprised. I didn't even know Mr. Blackwood was getting married. Maya caught Mrs. Whitmore's reflection in the mirror, and the older woman's face tightened slightly. Mr. Blackwood prefers to keep his personal affairs private, she said diplomatically. Well, it's very romantic, having a small garden ceremony, Sarah continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. Much more intimate than those huge society weddings. Your dress is beautiful too. I saw Mrs. Whitmore hanging it up. Maya hadn't even seen her wedding dress yet. She had assumed she would wear something she already owned, but apparently Alexander had thought of everything. After her hair was styled into an elegant updo with soft curls framing her face, Sarah moved on to her makeup. She kept it natural as promised, enhancing Maya's features without making her look like someone else entirely. When she was finished, Maya had to admit she looked beautiful, even if she felt like she was preparing for her own funeral. Let me help you with your dress, Mrs. Whitmore said after Sarah had packed up her supplies and left. The dress was hanging in the large wardrobe, and Maya gasped when she saw it. It was a simple but elegant cream-colored dress made from the finest silk she had ever seen. The style was classic, with a modest neckline and sleeves that came to her elbows. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her measurements. How did he know my size? Maya asked as Mrs. Whitmore fastened the buttons down the back. Mr. Blackwood is very thorough in his business dealings, Mrs. Whitmore replied carefully. The implication made Maya's skin crawl. How long had Alexander been planning this? Had he been watching her, studying her, long before approaching her father? Mrs. Whitmore produced a simple string of pearls from a jewelry box on the dresser. These belonged to Mr. Blackwood's mother, she said softly as she fastened them around Maya's neck. He thought you might like to wear them. Maya touched the pearls gently. They were warm against her skin and felt substantial, not like the costume jewelry she was used to wearing. It was the first personal thing Alexander had offered, and she wondered if it meant something or if it was just part of the show. She was a lovely woman, Mrs. Whitmore said quietly. Very kind and gentle. She would have liked you. What happened to her? Mrs. Whitmore's expression became guarded. She died when Mr. Blackwood was quite young. It was very difficult for him. There was something in the older woman's tone that suggested there was more to the story, but Maya didn't have a chance to ask before another knock came at the door. That will be your escort, Mrs. Whitmore said. It's time. Maya's hands began to shake as she took one last look at herself in the mirror. She looked like a bride, but she certainly didn't feel like one. This wasn't how she had imagined her wedding day as a little girl. There was supposed to be love and joy and excitement, not fear and resignation. The escort turned out to be Mr. Harrison, Alexander's elderly lawyer, who would be walking her down the aisle since her father wasn't there. He was a kind-looking man with white hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. You look lovely, my dear, he said sincerely. Don't be nervous. Everything will be fine. Maya wished she could believe him, but as they walked through the house and out into the gardens, her anxiety only increased. The ceremony was being held in a secluded section of the garden, surrounded by tall hedges for privacy. White flowers had been arranged throughout the space, and a small archway covered in roses marked where she would exchange vows with Alexander. There were only a handful of people present: Mrs. Whitmore, two men in suits who must have been business associates, and the minister who would perform the ceremony. Alexander stood beneath the archway with his back to her, wearing a dark charcoal suit that emphasized his tall, imposing frame. As Mr. Harrison led her down the makeshift aisle, Alexander turned to watch her approach. His expression was unreadable, but his dark eyes never left her face. Maya tried to read something, anything, in his gaze: appreciation, nervousness, even simple human interest. But his face remained a mask of polite composure. When they reached the archway, Mr. Harrison placed Maya's hand in Alexander's and stepped back. Alexander's hand was warm and strong, and Maya was surprised by how steady her own hand felt in his grasp. The minister, a middle-aged man with a kind smile, began the ceremony with traditional words about marriage being a sacred bond between two people. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. There was nothing sacred about this business transaction. Do you, Alexander James Blackwood, take Maya Elizabeth Chun to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, until death do you part? I do, Alexander said clearly, his voice steady and strong. The minister turned to Maya, and she felt her throat go dry. Do you, Maya Elizabeth Chun, take Alexander James Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, until death do you part? Maya opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting. Alexander's hand tightened slightly around hers, and when she looked up at him, she saw something flash across his face. Not anger, but something almost like concern. I do, she finally whispered. The minister smiled and continued with the ring exchange. Alexander produced 2 simple gold bands from his pocket. As he slipped the ring onto Maya's finger, she noticed his hands weren't quite as steady as his voice had been. When it was her turn to place his ring, her fingers trembled slightly. By the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister announced. You may kiss the bride. Maya's eyes widened in panic. They hadn't discussed this part. Alexander must have seen her expression because he leaned down and brushed the lightest possible kiss across her lips. It was over so quickly that Maya barely had time to register the warmth of his mouth against hers. Congratulations, the minister said warmly, apparently oblivious to the tension between the newlyweds. The small group of witnesses offered their congratulations, and Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Maya accepted their well wishes with a smile that felt like it might crack her face. Shall we move to the terrace for refreshments? Alexander suggested, his hand at the small of Maya's back as he guided her away from the ceremony site. The reception was as small and formal as the ceremony had been. There was champagne and an elaborate spread of food on the terrace overlooking the gardens. Maya found herself standing next to Alexander, playing the part of the happy bride while conversations flowed around her. Beautiful ceremony, one of the business associates said to Alexander. Your wife is lovely. Thank you, Alexander replied smoothly. Maya is quite special. The casual way he lied, the ease with which he played the role of devoted husband, unsettled Maya more than his earlier coldness had. At least when he was being distant, she knew where she stood. After an hour of polite conversation and forced smiles, the guests began to leave. Maya found herself alone on the terrace with her new husband, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the gardens. Well, that's done, Alexander said, loosening his tie slightly. It was the most relaxed she had seen him since they met. What happens now? Maya asked. Now we continue with our normal lives, Alexander replied, checking his watch. I have a conference call with Tokyo in an hour, and then I'll be in meetings for the rest of the afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore can show you around the house properly if you'd like. Just like that, he was back to treating her like a house guest. Maya watched him walk away, disappearing into the house to return to his real life, while she stood there in her wedding dress feeling utterly abandoned. Mrs. Whitmore appeared at her elbow with a sympathetic smile. Come on, dear. Let's get you changed into something more comfortable, and then I'll give you the proper tour. Maya was grateful to get out of the wedding dress, beautiful as it was. She changed into a simple sundress and comfortable shoes, feeling more like herself. Mrs. Whitmore led her through the house room by room, explaining the history and function of each space. The house was even larger than Maya had realized. There were 2 libraries, a formal dining room that could seat 20 people, a ballroom that hadn't been used in years, and multiple sitting rooms. The kitchen was massive and modern, clearly designed for entertaining large groups. How many people live here? Maya asked as they climbed a back staircase to explore another wing. Just Mr. Blackwood, and now you, of course. I live in the staff quarters above the garage, and we have a groundskeeper who comes daily. Cook comes 3 times a week to prepare meals, more often when Mr. Blackwood is entertaining. It seems like such a big house for just 2 people. The Blackwood family has owned this estate for 3 generations, Mrs. Whitmore explained as they entered what appeared to be a formal portrait gallery. Mr. Blackwood's grandfather built it as a summer home initially, but when the family lost their primary residence in the city, they moved here permanently. Maya studied the portraits lining the walls. They were mostly of stern-looking men who shared Alexander's dark eyes and strong jawline. But there were a few women as well, and Maya stopped in front of one that caught her attention. The woman in the painting was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with kind eyes and dark hair similar to Maya's own. She was wearing an elegant green dress and sitting in what appeared to be the same library where Maya had met Alexander the night before. "That's Mr. Blackwood's mother, Elena," Mrs. Whitmore said softly. "She was very beautiful, wasn't she?" "She looked sad," Maya observed. There was something in the woman's expression, a melancholy that seemed at odds with her gentle smile. Mrs. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. She was a very sensitive woman. The Blackwood men can be difficult to live with. "What do you mean?" But Mrs. Whitmore had already moved on to the next portrait, and Maya sensed that she had pushed the conversation as far as the older woman was comfortable going. They continued the tour, visiting bedrooms that hadn't been used in years, a conservatory filled with exotic plants, and, finally, the wing that contained Alexander's private offices. "Mr. Blackwood works from home most days," Mrs. Whitmore explained as they walked down a corridor lined with heavy wooden doors. "He has offices in the city as well, but he prefers the privacy here." "Does he have many visitors?" "Business associates occasionally, but no social guests. Mr. Blackwood is very private about his personal life." They paused in front of a door that was slightly different from the others. It was painted black instead of the natural wood finish, and there was a modern security keypad next to the handle. "What's in there?" Maya asked. Mrs. Whitmore's expression became carefully neutral. "That's Mr. Blackwood's private study. He doesn't like to be disturbed when he's working in there." There was something in the older woman's tone that suggested the room was off-limits for reasons beyond simple privacy, but Maya didn't push. She was already feeling overwhelmed by everything she had seen and learned. They ended the tour in the conservatory, where Mrs. Whitmore served tea among the flowering plants and tropical trees. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass walls, creating a warm, peaceful atmosphere that was a welcome change from the formal grandeur of the rest of the house. "This is lovely," Maya said, admiring a particularly beautiful orchid. "It was Elena's favorite room," Mrs. Whitmore said. "She spent hours here painting and reading. I thought you might enjoy it as well, given your artistic interests." "Alexander told you I paint." "He mentioned it, yes. He also had your art supplies brought from your family's house. They're upstairs in the small sitting room next to your bedroom." Maya was surprised by this thoughtfulness. "When did he do that?" "This morning, while you were getting ready. I believe your brother packed them for you." Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the thought of James carefully packing her paints and brushes. It was such a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. "There's an easel and proper lighting set up," Mrs. Whitmore continued. "Mr. Blackwood thought you might like to continue your work. That was kind of him. He can be thoughtful when he chooses to be," Mrs. Whitmore said carefully. "He's not an easy man to understand, but he's not entirely without feeling." Maya sipped her tea and wondered what Mrs. Whitmore wasn't telling her. The older woman clearly cared about Alexander, but there was also a wariness in the way she spoke about him, as if she was constantly measuring her words. "Mrs. Whitmore," Maya said slowly, "what happened to Alexander's mother? I mean, how did she die?" The older woman set down her teacup with trembling fingers. "It was a long time ago, dear. Mr. Blackwood was only 12 years old." "But what happened?" Mrs. Whitmore looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure they were truly alone. The official story was that it was an accident. She fell down the main staircase and broke her neck. The official story? Elena was troubled in the months before her death. She had been acting strangely, seemed frightened all the time. She barely left her room, and when she did, she was always looking over her shoulder as if someone was following her. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "You think someone pushed her?" "I think Elena Blackwood knew something she shouldn't have known," Mrs. Whitmore said quietly, "and I think it got her killed." Before Maya could ask any more questions, The sound of footsteps on the stone path outside the conservatory made Mrs. Whitmore go pale. She quickly began clearing away the tea service, her movements sharp and nervous. "Not a word of this conversation to Mr. Blackwood," she whispered urgently. "Promise me." "I promise," Maya said, just as Alexander appeared in the doorway of the conservatory. He had changed out of his wedding suit into dark jeans and a black sweater. The casual clothes should have made him look more approachable, but somehow they only emphasized his dangerous edge. "I see you're settling in," he said, his eyes moving between Maya and Mrs. Whitmore. "Mrs. Whitmore was just showing me around," Maya replied, hoping her voice sounded more casual than she felt. "Good. I hope you found everything to your satisfaction." His gaze lingered on Mrs. Whitmore, who was still nervously tidying the tea service. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'll be working late tonight. Don't wait up." "Of course, sir," she replied without meeting his eyes. Alexander turned back to Maya. "I'll be in my study if you need anything. Dinner is at 7. Mrs. Whitmore will show you to the dining room." He left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving Maya with 100 new questions and a growing sense of unease. If Mrs. Whitmore was right about his mother's death, what else was Alexander hiding? And, more importantly, was Maya now in the same danger that had killed Elena Blackwood? That evening, Maya sat across from Alexander at one end of the massive dining table, feeling like they were separated by an ocean rather than just a few feet of mahogany. He had changed back into a suit for dinner, and his manner was as formal as if she were a business acquaintance rather than his wife of 8 hours. The meal was elegant, but awkward, with most of their conversation limited to polite inquiries about her comfort and his brief responses about his work. Maya found herself studying his face, looking for any resemblance to the young boy who had lost his mother so tragically. "Your mother was very beautiful," Maya said during a lull in conversation, testing the waters. Alexander's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You saw her portrait?" "Mrs. Whitmore showed me the gallery. She said your mother loved the conservatory." "She did." Alexander's voice was carefully neutral, but Maya caught something flickering in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. "She died when you were young." "Yes." The single word was delivered with such finality that Maya knew the subject was closed. But her curiosity was stronger than her caution. It must have been very difficult, losing her like that. Alexander set down his fork and fixed her with a stare that made her blood run cold. "Maya, let me make something very clear. My family's history is not a topic I discuss with anyone. I suggest you focus on your own adjustment to life here and leave the past where it belongs." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Maya nodded quickly and returned to her meal, but her mind was racing. Alexander's reaction had confirmed what Mrs. Whitmore had implied. There were dangerous secrets buried in this house, and Maya had just stumbled onto one of them. After dinner, Alexander disappeared back into his study, leaving Maya to explore on her own. She found her way to the small sitting room next to her bedroom, where her art supplies had indeed been set up exactly as Mrs. Whitmore had described. Her easel was positioned near the window to catch the best light, and her paints and brushes were arranged on a small table nearby. Maya picked up one of her brushes, running her fingers over the familiar handle. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she felt a small spark of hope. If she could paint, she could survive anything. Art had always been her escape, her way of processing emotions and finding beauty even in difficult circumstances. She was considering what to paint first when she heard voices from somewhere below her window. Moving closer to the glass, she could see 2 figures standing in the garden near the fountain. One was clearly Alexander, his tall frame unmistakable even in the darkness. The other was a shorter, stockier man she didn't recognize. Their conversation was too quiet for her to make out words, but their body language suggested it wasn't a friendly chat. The stranger seemed agitated, gesturing emphatically, while Alexander stood perfectly still. After a few minutes, the stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a manila envelope. Alexander took the envelope and handed the man something in return. Maya couldn't see what it was from her angle. The stranger nodded and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Alexander alone by the fountain. Maya watched as her new husband opened the envelope and examined its contents under the garden lights. Even from her window, She could see the tension in his shoulders. After a moment, he crumpled whatever was inside and shoved it into his pocket before striding back toward the house. Maya quickly stepped away from the window, her heart racing. What had she just witnessed? Some kind of business transaction? Or something more sinister? As she got ready for bed in her beautiful but lonely room, Maya couldn't 3 weeks into her marriage. Maya had settled into a routine that felt more like living in a luxury hotel than being a wife. She woke up alone, ate breakfast alone in the morning room while Alexander had already left for his city office, spent her days painting or reading in the conservatory, and then shared awkward, silent dinners with her husband before he disappeared into his study for the evening. Alexander was polite but distant, treating her with the same courteous detachment he might show a business associate's wife. He inquired about her comfort and needs, ensured she had everything required for her art, and occasionally made stilted conversation about current events or her family. But there was an invisible wall between them that Maya was beginning to think might never come down. She had spoken to her father and James twice, brief conversations where she assured them she was well and happy. The lies came easier each time, though she could hear the worry in her father's voice and the loneliness in her brother's. James was starting his senior year of high school, and Maya ached knowing she was missing these important months of his life. It was on a rainy Thursday morning that Maya made her first real discovery about her husband's secrets. She had been painting in the conservatory when Mrs. Whitmore appeared, looking more flustered than Maya had ever seen her. "I'm sorry to bother you, dear," the older woman said, wringing her hands nervously. "But I need to ask a favor. I've got to drive into town. My sister's been taken to the hospital suddenly. But Mr. Blackwood is expecting an important delivery this morning, and someone needs to be here to sign for it." "Of course," Maya said, setting down her brush. "What kind of delivery?" "I'm not sure, honestly, but it always comes to the back entrance, and the delivery man is very particular about getting a signature from someone in the household." Mrs. Whitmore grabbed her coat from a nearby chair. "The doorbell for the back entrance rings in the kitchen. If you could just sign whatever papers he has and put the package in Mr. Blackwood's study, that would be wonderful." Maya nodded, though something about the request felt odd. Why would a business delivery come to the back entrance instead of the front? And why was Mrs. Whitmore so nervous about it? After the older woman left, Maya tried to return to her painting, but she couldn't concentrate. The rain drumming against the glass walls of the conservatory seemed unusually loud, and every small sound made her jump. When the back doorbell finally rang around 11 o'clock, Maya practically ran to answer it. The man standing on the back doorstep was not what she had expected. He was thin and nervous-looking, with darting eyes that wouldn't meet hers directly. He wore a plain brown uniform, but no company logo that Maya could see. "Delivery for Blackwood," he said curtly, holding out a clipboard and a medium-sized package wrapped in brown paper. "I'll need to see some identification," Maya said, something making her cautious. The man's eyes narrowed. "Lady, I've been making this delivery every month for 2 years. Just sign the paper and take the package." "Every month?" Maya asked, accepting the clipboard. The delivery slip was mostly blank except for Alexander's name and an illegible signature at the bottom. "Third Thursday," the man confirmed impatiently. "Now can you sign so I can get out of this rain?" Maya signed her name quickly and took the package. It was heavier than it looked, and there was something about its weight distribution that made her think it contained something other than documents. The man hurried away without another word, disappearing into the rain-soaked morning. Maya stood in the kitchen, turning the package over in her hands. There was no return address, no shipping company label, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Just Alexander's name written in block letters with a black marker. She knew she should take it directly to his study, as Mrs. Whitmore had instructed. A good wife would respect her husband's privacy and not ask questions. But Maya was beginning to realize that being a good wife might not be compatible with staying alive in this house. The package felt solid, rectangular, and there was something that rattled slightly when she shook it gently. Against every instinct telling her to mind her own business, Maya carried the package upstairs to her sitting room and closed the door behind her. Her hands trembled slightly as she carefully peeled back one corner of the brown paper wrapping. Inside was a plain cardboard box with no markings. Maya hesitated for another moment before lifting the lid. What she found inside made her stomach lurch with fear and confusion. The box contained several small plastic bags filled with white powder, a thick stack of $100 bills bound with rubber bands, and a flip phone that looked like something from 10 years ago. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, Maya unfolded the note. It was written in the same block letters as the address. Monthly payment, AS agreed. Next shipment arrives Friday. Warehouse 7 as usual. Destroy this note. Maya stared at the contents of the box, her mind racing. The white powder could only be one thing: drugs. Cocaine, probably, based on its appearance. And the money, there had to be thousands of dollars in that stack. Her husband was involved in drug trafficking. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Alexander Blackwood, respected businessman and pillar of the community, was a criminal. And now, by virtue of her marriage to him, Maya was connected to his illegal activities. She thought about Mrs. Whitmore's words about Elena Blackwood knowing something she shouldn't have known. Had Alexander's mother discovered his criminal activities? Is that why she had died? Maya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely rewrap the package. She had to get it back downstairs and into Alexander's study before he returned home. But first, she needed to document what she had seen. Using her phone, she quickly took several photos of the package contents, making sure to capture the note clearly. Then, she carefully rewrapped everything exactly as it had been and hurried downstairs. Alexander's study door was locked, but Maya remembered seeing Mrs. Whitmore use a key from the kitchen drawer marked household keys. Her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the whole house could hear it. Maya retrieved the key and let herself into her husband's private sanctuary. The study was smaller than the main library, but much more personal. Alexander's massive desk dominated the room, and the walls were lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves. But what caught Maya's attention immediately were the photographs scattered across the desk's surface. They were surveillance photos, black and white images of various people going about their daily lives. Maya recognized some of the faces from newspaper headlines. A city councilman who had been arrested for corruption last year, a businessman who had mysteriously disappeared 6 months ago, a judge who had been found dead in his home just last week. Next to the photographs was a leather-bound ledger filled with names, dates, and dollar amounts written in Alexander's precise handwriting. Maya didn't have time to examine it closely, but even a quick glance showed payments in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. She placed the package on Alexander's desk and backed toward the door, desperate to get out of the room before she discovered anything else that would put her in danger. But, as she turned to leave, something on the bookshelf caught her eye. It was a framed photograph of Elena Blackwood, but not the formal portrait Maya had seen in the gallery. This was a candid shot of her sitting in the conservatory, painting at an easel. She looked happy and relaxed, completely absorbed in her work. It was the only personal touch in the otherwise coldly efficient room. Maya stared at the photo, thinking about the woman who had lived in this house before her. Elena had been an artist too, had spent her time in the same conservatory where Maya now painted. Had she also stumbled upon her husband's secrets? Had she also tried to make sense of a marriage built on lies? The sound of a car in the driveway made Maya's blood freeze. Alexander was home earlier than expected. She quickly locked the study door and returned the key to the kitchen drawer, then ran upstairs to her sitting room. Her heart was still racing when she heard the front door close and Alexander's footsteps crossing the marble foyer. Maya tried to paint, but her hands were shaking too much to hold the brush steady. She kept thinking about the drugs and money in that package, about the surveillance photographs on Alexander's desk, about the ledger full of payments to unknown recipients. Her husband wasn't just a businessman. He was the head of some kind of criminal organization. When dinner time arrived, Maya didn't know how she was going to sit across from Alexander and pretend everything was normal. But she forced herself to go downstairs, knowing that any change in her routine might arouse suspicion. Alexander was already seated at the dining room table when she arrived, still wearing his business suit from the city office. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, Maya thought she saw something different in his expression. His usual cold politeness was replaced by something more calculating, more dangerous. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Fine," Maya replied, taking her seat across from him. "I painted for a while. Mrs. Whitmore had to leave suddenly. Her sister was ill." "Yes, she called me," Alexander said, cutting into his steak with precise movements. "She mentioned you took care of a delivery for me." Maya's mouth went dry. "Just a package. I put it in your study." "That was helpful of you." Alexander's dark eyes studied her face intently. "I hope it wasn't too much trouble." "Not at all." They ate in silence for several minutes, but Maya could feel Alexander watching her. Every time she looked up, his gaze was on her, as if he was trying to read her thoughts. She forced herself to eat, though the food felt like ash in her mouth. "Maya," Alexander said suddenly, setting down his fork, "I want to discuss something with you." Her heart began to race. Did he somehow know she had opened the package? "What is it?" "I'll be traveling next week. A business trip to overseas. I'll be gone for several days." Maya felt a mixture of relief and new anxiety. Relief that she would have a break from his intense scrutiny, but anxiety about what he might be doing on this business trip. "Where are you going?" she asked, trying to sound like a concerned wife. "Europe. Some international contracts that require my personal attention." Alexander picked up his wine glass and took a slow sip. "While I'm gone, I want you to stay on the property. Don't go into town, don't have any visitors, and don't answer the door for anyone except Mrs. Whitmore." "Why?" The question slipped out before Maya could stop herself. Alexander's expression hardened. "Because I said so. This house has excellent security, but only if you follow the rules." "What kind of security?" "The kind that keeps my wife safe," Alexander said coldly. "I trust you'll cooperate." It wasn't a request. Maya nodded quickly, but her mind was spinning. What kind of business required this level of security? And why was Alexander so concerned about her safety when he would be out of the country? After dinner, Alexander disappeared into his study as usual, but tonight Maya could hear him on the phone. His voice was too low for her to make out words, but his tone was sharp and commanding. She imagined him discussing drug shipments and money transfers, planning whatever criminal activities required his personal attention in Europe. Maya lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She thought about her family, safe in their modest home with their ordinary problems. She thought about her abandoned art gallery showing and the life she had given up. Most of all, she thought about Elena Blackwood and what had really happened to her. Tomorrow, Maya decided, she was going to start looking for answers. Alexander might think he had married a naive young woman who would ask no questions and cause no trouble, but he was about to discover that Maya Chun was much more resourceful than she appeared. The next morning, Maya waited until she heard Alexander's car leave for the city before beginning her investigation. Mrs. Whitmore was bustling around the house, preparing for Alexander's trip, which gave Maya the perfect opportunity to explore. She started with the main library, looking for any books or documents that might provide clues about the Blackwood family history. Most of the books were classics or business texts, but in one corner, she found a section devoted to local history and genealogy. One book in particular caught her attention: Prominent Families of the Hudson Valley. The chapter on the Blackwoods revealed some interesting information. Alexander's grandfather had indeed built the estate as a summer home, but he had made his fortune in ways that were described euphemistically as various business ventures. Reading between the lines, Maya suspected the criminal activities in the family went back at least 2 generations. Alexander's father, Marcus Blackwood, had died when Alexander was 18, just 6 years after his mother's death. The book didn't mention the circumstances of Marcus's death, but Maya was beginning to see a pattern of premature deaths in the Blackwood family. She was returning the book to its shelf when she noticed something odd about the bookcase itself. One section seemed slightly out of alignment with the rest, and when Maya pushed against it experimentally, it moved slightly. Her heart racing with excitement and fear, she pushed harder. The entire section of bookshelf swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage behind it. Maya stared at the secret passage in amazement. This was something out of a Gothic novel, not a modern home. But, after a moment of hesitation, she grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and stepped into the passage. The corridor was narrow and dusty, with stone walls that suggested it had been built at the same time as the house's foundation. It ran parallel to the main hallway, and Maya could see several branching passages leading in different directions. She followed the main corridor, her footsteps echoing softly in the confined space. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a small room that took Maya's breath away. It was clearly Elena Blackwood's secret art studio. Paintings covered every available wall space, and art supplies were scattered across several tables. But these weren't the pleasant landscapes and portraits Maya had expected based on the conservatory setup. These paintings were dark and disturbing. They depicted scenes of violence and fear, a woman falling downstairs, a man's hands around another's throat, shadowy figures exchanging money in dark alleys. In the center of the room stood Elena's final painting, left unfinished on an easel. It showed the view from Maya's current bedroom window, but with a sinister twist. In the garden below, two figures stood by the fountain, one tall and imposing, the other shorter and clearly frightened. Even though the faces weren't clearly defined, Maya could tell the tall figure was meant to be Alexander. The shorter figure appeared to be a woman with dark hair very similar to Elena's own. Below the painting, written in Elena's delicate handwriting, was a single word: truth. Maya stared at the painting with growing horror. Elena Blackwood had known about her husband's criminal activities, and she had documented what she knew through her art. These paintings were evidence of everything she had discovered: the violence, the fear, the deadly consequences of crossing Alexander Blackwood. But they were also Elena's death warrant. If Alexander had found this room, had seen these paintings, Maya heard a sound that made her blood freeze, the front door of the house closing with a heavy thud. Alexander's voice called out for Mrs. Whitmore, echoing through the halls. He was home early again. Maya's heart pounded as she quickly made her way back through the secret passage, carefully closing the hidden door behind her. She managed to get back to the conservatory and pick up her paintbrush just as Alexander appeared in the doorway. "Working hard?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp and searching. "Just trying to capture the light," Maya replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Alexander walked into the conservatory, moving to stand behind her easel. Maya was acutely aware of his presence, of how easily those strong hands could snap her neck just as they had probably done to his mother. "Your technique is quite good," he said, studying her painting. "Very different from other artists I've known." The pause before other artists sent chills down Maya's spine. He was talking about Elena. "Thank you," Maya managed. "I've been thinking," Alexander continued, still standing uncomfortably close behind her. "While I'm away next week, perhaps you'd like to explore the house more thoroughly. There are many rooms you haven't seen yet. Hidden treasures, you might say." Maya's hand tightened on her paintbrush. Was he testing her? Did he know about the secret passage? "I'd like that," she said carefully. Alexander left for Europe on a gray Monday morning. His departure marked only by the sound of a car pulling away from the estate and the sudden absence of tension that Maya hadn't realized she'd been carrying in her shoulders. Mrs. Whitmore saw him off, returning to the house with a mixture of relief and worry that Maya was beginning to recognize as the older woman's permanent state. "He'll be gone for a week," Mrs. Whitmore announced over breakfast. "Maybe longer if his business takes more time than expected." "What kind of business?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Mrs. Whitmore's face became guarded. "Import and export," she said carefully. "He has connections all over Europe." Maya nodded and returned to her breakfast, but her mind was already racing ahead to what she planned to accomplish while Alexander was gone. She had a week to search Elena's secret studio thoroughly, to piece together the truth about what had happened in this house, and to find evidence that might protect her from the same fate. After Mrs. Whitmore left to run errands in town, Maya made her way to the library and the hidden passage. In the daylight, with no fear of Alexander returning unexpectedly, she could explore more carefully. Elena's secret studio was even more disturbing in the full light of her flashlight. Maya examined each painting systematically, looking for clues about what Elena had discovered and when. The paintings appeared to be arranged chronologically, starting with relatively normal scenes and gradually becoming darker and more sinister. The earliest paintings showed Alexander as Elena must have seen him when they first met. Handsome, charming, successful. But, as Maya moved around the room, the progression of Elena's growing awareness and fear was painfully clear. The paintings began to include shadowy figures, secret meetings, and, eventually, scenes of outright violence. One painting particularly caught Maya's attention. It showed the view from Alexander's study window, but focused on the garden where Maya had seen Alexander meeting with the mysterious stranger on her wedding night. In Elena's version, the scene included several figures instead of just two, and money and packages were being exchanged. But it was Elena's final painting that made Maya's blood run cold. It depicted the main staircase of the house, but from an unusual angle, as if the viewer was falling down the stairs. At the top of the staircase, a tall figure in shadows watched the fall. Elena had known exactly how she was going to die. Maya found Elena's journal hidden in a wooden box beneath one of the work tables. The entries began about 3 years into her marriage to Alexander, when she had started to notice things that didn't add up. AB received another late-night visitor tonight. One early entry read, "The same man as before, with the nervous eyes and the briefcase." They spoke in whispers in the garden, and when the man left, AB went immediately to his locked study. I tried to listen at the door, but could hear nothing through the thick wood. As Maya read on, Elena's entries became more detailed and more frightening. She had begun following Alexander, documenting his meetings, photographing his associates when possible. She had discovered that Blackwood Enterprises was a front for a sophisticated criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder for hire. I found receipts in AB's jacket pocket. One entry read, "Payments to someone called the Cleaner, $50,000 for handling the Judge problem. Judge Morrison was found dead in his study 3 days later. The police are calling it a heart attack, but I know better." Maya remembered Judge Morrison's photograph on Alexander's desk. Elena had been documenting his crimes, building a case against him, just as Maya was trying to do now. But the most chilling entries came near the end of the journal, when Elena had realized that Alexander was becoming suspicious of her activities. "He knows I've been in his study," Elena had written in increasingly shaky handwriting. "I can see it in his eyes when he looks at me. He watches me constantly now, follows me through the house. Mrs. W. has started avoiding me. I think he's told her something about my mental state." The final entry was dated just 1 week before Elena's death. "I know too much, and he knows I know. I've hidden copies of everything in the safe places we discussed, my darling sister. If something happens to me, you'll know where to look. Remember our childhood games of hide and seek. Remember the places only we knew about. The truth is there, waiting. I pray you'll never need to find it. But if you do, use it to stop him. Don't let him hurt anyone else the way he's going to hurt me." Maya stared at the final entry, her heart racing. Elena had a sister, and she had hidden evidence somewhere else in the house. Evidence that could expose Alexander's crimes and prove that Elena's death was murder. But where were these safe places that only Elena and her sister had known about? Maya spent the rest of the day searching Elena's studio for any other clues, but found nothing more. That evening, as Maya sat alone in the huge dining room eating dinner, Mrs. Whitmore seemed unusually nervous. She kept glancing at Maya as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't bring herself to speak. "Is everything all right?" Maya finally asked. Mrs. Whitmore sat down across from her, something she had never done before. "Miss Maya," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something important." "What is it?" "Elena Blackwood was my niece." Maya's fork clattered to her plate. "Your niece?" "My sister's daughter," Mrs. Whitmore confirmed, tears beginning to fill her eyes. "I got this job because Elena asked Alexander to hire me. She said she needed family close by." "Then, you knew?" Maya began. "I knew she was scared. I knew she had discovered things about her husband that no wife should ever have to know. And I knew that when she died, it wasn't an accident." Mrs. Whitmore reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, brass key. "Elena gave me this just before she died. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to someone who could use it to stop Alexander." "What does it open?" "A safety deposit box in town. Elena rented it under her maiden name, Elena Morrison." She left instructions that if she died under suspicious circumstances, I was to retrieve the contents and turn them over to the authorities. Maya stared at the key, understanding its significance. Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you go to the police after Elena died? Mrs. Whitmore's face crumpled. Because Alexander threatened my grandson, she whispered. Elena died on a Tuesday. The following Saturday, Alexander showed me photographs of my grandson Tommy walking to school, playing in the park, sleeping in his bedroom. He made it very clear what would happen if I ever spoke to anyone about Elena's death. Maya felt sick. Alexander's reach extended far beyond his own household. He could threaten anyone, anywhere, whenever he needed to ensure silence. Why are you telling me this now? Maya asked. Because you're just like Elena, Mrs. Whitmore said sadly. You're asking the same questions, looking at things the same way. And I can see that he's starting to watch you the way he watched her near the end. Maya thought about Alexander's behavior over the past few weeks, his intense scrutiny, his carefully worded warnings about exploring the house. Mrs. Whitmore was right. The pattern was repeating itself. What was in the safety deposit box? Maya asked. I don't know. I was too afraid to look. But Elena said it contained proof of everything. Documents, photographs, recordings. Everything needed to put Alexander away forever. Maya took the key from Mrs. Whitmore's trembling hands. I'll go tomorrow. It's too dangerous, Mrs. Whitmore protested. If Alexander finds out. Alexander is in Europe, Maya said firmly. And if I don't do this now, I'll end up just like Elena. The next morning, Maya drove into town for the first time since her wedding. The bank where Elena had rented the safety deposit box was small and old-fashioned, the kind of place where privacy was still valued above convenience. The bank manager, Mr. Peterson, was elderly and discreet. When Maya presented Elena's key and identified herself as the authorized beneficiary, he led her to the vault without asking uncomfortable questions. Mrs. Morrison was very specific about the conditions for accessing this box, he said as they walked through the secure area. She said that if she died under any circumstances, the contents were to be released to either her sister or any young woman who came asking about Elena Blackwood. Maya's hands shook as she inserted the key into the safety deposit box. Inside, she found exactly what Elena's journal had promised, a complete dossier on Alexander's criminal activities. There were photographs of drug shipments arriving at various warehouses, financial records showing money laundering through shell companies, and recordings of phone conversations where Alexander ordered violence against his enemies. There were also records of payments to corrupt officials, including judges, politicians, and police officers. But most damning of all was a video recording that Elena had made just days before her death. I'm sure you would. Alexander's hand suddenly rested on her shoulder, and Maya had to fight not to flinch away from his touch. Just remember what I said about staying safe. This house has many secrets, and some of them can be quite dangerous for the unwary. The threat was clear, even wrapped in his polite words. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Alexander's hand squeezed her shoulder once before he released her. I'll see you at dinner, he said. And then he was gone, leaving Maya alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that she was living with a murderer. That night, Maya lay in bed making plans. Alexander would be leaving for Europe in 3 days. While he was gone, she would explore Elena's secret studio more thoroughly and try to piece together exactly what had happened to her predecessor. She would also try to find a way to contact the authorities, though she knew she would need solid evidence before anyone would believe her story. Most importantly, she would start planning her escape, because one way or another, Maya was not going to end up like Elena Blackwood. She was going to survive this marriage, expose Alexander's crimes, and find a way back to the life she had been forced to leave behind. But first, she had to make sure she lived long enough to do it. To shake the feeling that she had married a man with very dangerous secrets. Mrs. Whitmore's words echoed in her mind. Elena Blackwood had known something she shouldn't have known, and it had gotten her killed. Maya looked at herself in the mirror as she brushed her teeth, still wearing the wedding ring that felt foreign on her finger. She thought about her family, probably asleep in their beds, believing she was safe, and starting a new life with a wealthy husband. If only they knew the truth. She wasn't starting a new life. She had walked into a web of secrets and lies that she was only beginning to understand. And, if she wasn't very careful, she might end up like the last Mrs. Blackwood, at the bottom of those marble stairs with a broken neck. But Maya was not Elena Blackwood. She was stronger than she looked, more determined than people gave her credit for. And she had survived too much already to give up without a fight. If Alexander Blackwood thought he had married a meek, obedient wife who would ask no questions and cause no trouble, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. Out onto the balcony and breathed in the night air, looking out over the vast gardens that would soon be her prison. In the distance, she could see lights from the nearest neighbor's house, at least a mile away. She thought about her family, probably sitting around their kitchen table right now, wondering what she was doing. She thought about the paintings she had left behind, and the gallery showing that would happen without her. She thought about the life she had planned, and the life she was about to begin. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Alexander Blackwood, wife to a man who saw her as nothing more than a business asset. She would live in this beautiful, cold house, and play the role of the perfect corporate wife while her dreams withered away. But, as Maya stood there in the darkness, she made herself a promise. She might be trapped in this arrangement, but she wouldn't let it destroy who she was. Somehow, some way, she would find a way to survive this marriage, and maybe even find some happiness in spite of it. What she didn't know was that Alexander Blackwood was harboring secrets far darker than a loveless marriage, and that her quiet determination to survive would soon put her in more danger than she could ever imagine.